A crisis in the BBC becomes a major foreign policy test for Keir Starmer. What does this mean for the UK-US relationship, and why does it matter for Europe? Welcome to Bridge the Channel. The most important foreign affairs story in the UK these days does not look like a foreign affairs story at all. It concerns the BBC, which has suddenly found itself in the middle of what could potentially become a crisis in the relationship between the UK and the US. What does this mean for British foreign policy, and what does it mean for European politics and the transatlantic relationship more broadly? All of this in this episode of Bridge the Channel. The top two leaders of the BBC had to resign after accusations of bias in the political coverage of the organization. But the main bone of contention was an edited footage of a Donald Trump speech from January 2021 that many considered misleading. The result is that the crisis at the BBC now has a foreign policy dimension, as the US president is threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion and is demanding an apology. All of this puts the government of Keir Starmer in a very difficult position. This center-left Labour government invested a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of capital in building a good personal relationship with Donald Trump, particularly a good personal relationship between Keir Starmer himself and Donald Trump. But now Starmer finds himself between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, any British government would be expected to defend the BBC from what appears to be like foreign interference and the complaints of a foreign leader threatening to sue the BBC. On the other hand, of course, this British government knows that it has to avoid anything that might actually offend the US president. How is the British government going to deal with this? For now, they're taking the position that the BBC is an independent entity and has to deal with its problems all of its own. The main problem here for Keir Starmer, of course, is that while he tries to defend British interests and while he tries to maintain some stability in British foreign policy, this may further hurt his domestic image. Remember, Donald Trump is actually not very popular here in the UK. Now, all of this is quite different to Trump's first term, when he was pretty much an isolationist and did not care so much about what's happening in other parts of the world. In his second term, he actually seems to invest much more time and energy in micromanaging aspects of domestic politics of countries around the world, particularly of US allies. The irony is that the closer of a US ally you are, the more leverage the United States has to influence your domestic policies. Europeans have already seen this, with Americans having strong opinions about freedom of speech in Europe or the way that the EU regulates the internet and online speech. The crisis in the BBC and how it became a foreign policy crisis for the British government raises the question also for other countries in Europe. Who's next? How will this crisis be resolved? Will the BBC settle with Trump? Will Trump basically forget about it and not sue at all? Will the BBC actually be forced to apologize? What precedent does all of this set about the BBC's relationship with foreign leaders who may want to do the same thing as Trump around the world? What does all of this mean for the British government about its ability to manage foreign policy and its relationship with Trump? And how will this affect Keir Starmer's standing at a time when he's taking a lot of battering on domestic issues such as the economy and migration? This crisis shows yet again that in the era of Donald Trump, no government is very far from unexpected crisis undermining its work. This is definitely going to have repercussions for the UK government under Starmer moving forward, and we will be here to analyze all of this for you. Until next time, take care.